I see it in the comments already. Not another carburetor video. Yes, another carburetor video. Why? Because people get a lot out of these things. Carburetor is like brutally simple in concept, extremely complex in execution. And there are so many variations that, you know, just one little wrong turn of the screwdriver can totally foul you up. So I want to go back and cover something that we've covered previously, but I want to add a twist to it because there's another dimension to all of this that I never covered before. I think I want to do it now. And it's adjusting the floats on a Holley carburetor. Now, attaining the proper float height, the proper fuel level in the bowl is important. It's critical. Not enough, you run out of fuel. Too much, and it sloshes over the top of the boosters and it floods the motor. So, Holley engineers, back in the 50s when they designed these carburetors, went to this sight plug method. So each float bowl has a sight plug, like this one right here. And if we take this out, we have our hole. And the proper adjustment, Holley engineers determined the proper adjustment is for the fuel to be just at the very bottom of the hole. So if you've got this thing set right and the engine is running, you'll see fuel just barely trickle out of the bottom of the hole. And that's because if it's any higher during normal driving meaning stopping, going, making turns, going uphill, downhill, during normal driving, a float height higher than that will allow fuel to slosh over into the boosters, make the car run fat or even stall it. So that level right there at the bottom is the proper level for street driving. Important to remember this. We'll go back to that in a minute. Obviously, you make your adjustments through this jam screw and the nut. The nut actually controls the height of the needle and seat, and the needle and seat controls the height of the float ball. You turn the nut in, you drop the float ball down, you turn the nut out, you bring the float ball back up. So that's how you make your basic Holley float bowl adjustment, and it's critical. If you're too far off on one of these, nothing can be right. So, and you do this, of course, if you've got electric fuel pumps, you want to do it with the electric fuel pump running. If you don't, you have to have the engine running. The car's got to be sitting on relatively level ground, motor level, to get those adjustments. Now, for a performance application, drag racing really specifically, you want the level higher. You actually want the fuel to be approximately a third to a halfway up this hole. But now that's clearly an impossible adjustment to make, because if the sight plug is out, well then how do you keep the fuel from just pouring out as you're making your adjustment? So you cannot make an accurate adjustment. And that's why for performance carburetors, both the Holley and the Holley derivatives, Holley clones, the performance carburetors all went to a sight glass style adjustment. By the way, I'm going to show you how to get a competition adjustment out of this standard one. I'll do that at the end. So they went to this sight glass, and the concept of the sight glass adjustment is pretty much the same. You want to have, well, the adjustment procedure is the same as far as raising and lowering to get your height up and down, and you want to see your fuel level approximately a half to a third of the way up the sight glass. And that seems simple enough, right? Because obviously it's the same as this, but it's not, because there's no way for the fuel to escape. Now picture this. Let's say you're going to lower the float on this. We're going to lower a float adjustment on this carburetor. As I force the float down, it's going to displace the fuel around it and cause its level to rise. So you've got a low float level, but you've got a high fuel level. Well, on this style carburetor, that's fine, because that fuel will escape through the hole. But you don't get that option with a sight glass carburetor. When you're doing a sight glass carburetor, as you lower the float's, you're actually forcing the float down, and as you're forcing the float down, you're causing the fuel around it to be displaced, and so it rises and it'll show high in the sight glass. You can have a float bowl adjustment where the float is almost completely closed off. Needle and seat is almost completely closed off, and the float at the bottom. And you can get a super high adjustment or a super high reading on the sight glass. So what you have to do when you're adjusting the float levels on a sight glass style carburetor is start with the float adjusted down low. So here's about where the normal float height would be, or thereabouts. Okay, and you want to start your adjustments with the float down about there, right? So that when you first turn on your pumps to fill the carburetor or start the engine to fill the carburetor, the fuel level is definitely going to be below the bottom of the sight glass. Now with the engine running, you raise the float and bring the level up. When you've achieved that area between 1/3 and 1/2, lock it down, and that's your adjustment. Now if by chance you go too far and you've gone to, let's say, 3/4 or you've filled the sight glass, you can't just turn the float back down to make the level go back down. You have to stop, shut the car or shut the pumps, drain fuel out of the bowl. In this case, this carburetor has an actual bowl drain, but if you don't have a bowl drain screw, then you take one of these bottom screws out, drain the float bowl out, turn the needle and seat down, push the float back down, and then start over again. Because when you're making your adjustments on a sight glass style carburetor, all of your adjusting has to be in the upward direction and never a lower direction. Does that make any sense? I've seen that foul up so many people. So now let's say you've got an older style carburetor, you've got a sight plug style carburetor, and you want to make that adjustment that's, you know, approximately halfway, 1/3 to a halfway up the hole. Well, all you do there is once you've got your basic adjustment, your normal adjustment where the fuel is just trickling out the bottom, you put your sight plug back in, and then you turn your adjustment nut one flat out, one flat counterclockwise. If you go one flat counterclockwise, you'll raise the float level high enough to bring the fuel level to that 1/3 to 1/2 height there. Generally speaking, you're okay to leave it there, but you're really probably better off if you're going to just drive the car, regular traffic and stuff like that. Like make that adjustment, that higher adjustment, when you're going to go race the car. But if you're just going to cruise around, drive and whatnot, then keep the fuel level or adjust the fuel level back down. So the sight plug carburetor is much easier to tune. It's much more forgiving. The sight glass, you got to be sharp. You got to stay on your toes, and it's a procedure that you have to go through. It's not as simple as this, but it is a nicer way. You know, you have to trickle in, you know, raw gas all over your engine. So I hope you got something out of that. I promise I won't do another carburetor video for at least like 5 days. I'll see you tomorrow.